Hello everyone, and welcome to this session on critical minerals, critical choices. So today we're going to be talking a lot about minerals. We're also going to be talking a lot about batteries and about what justice looks like in the new extractive push for those minerals. First up, we're going to have a keynote from Tae-Yoon Kim, who is the head of Energy Minerals Analysis Unit at the International Energy Agency, who will give us a rundown of the global outlook on critical minerals and what we need to do in order to make that supply chain much more resilient for the future. So Tae-Yoon Kim is coming up just now.
Thank you, Emily, for a warm introduction, and also very great pleasure to be here. I'm Tae-Yoon Kim from the International Energy Agency. Today, the IEA has been working on this topic of critical minerals for many years. So today I will give some brief snapshot of where industry is heading in terms of demand, supply, prices, investment, etc. And also some tasks we need to do to ensure some resilient and sustainable supply chains. And before going into the topic of critical minerals, and just wanted to touch upon some of the big trends we are seeing in the broader energy transition space. So there's a lot of debate about the pace of energy transitions, about pace of clean tech deployment in recent years. So whether it is slowing down in some market or it is making big progress in other markets, but in general, we are seeing quite robust progress in the deployment of clean tech from solar PV, wind turbines, electric vehicles, and others. Solar panels, for example, grew by almost 30% in 2024. Likewise, the electric cars grew by some 25% this year, despite some markets there are experiencing some slowing down. And the battery storage, the energy storage really surprised the market watchers in many ways. So in 2023, the deployment almost doubled compared with the past year, and they recorded another 75% increase in 2024. So is energy storage becoming the segment of the battery market in recent years, something we need to watch out. And another trend we might highlight is about the coming age of electricity. If you look at the past, the energy demand growth and electricity demand growth over the past decade, the electricity increased almost double the pace of overall total energy demand growth, because many of the end use, the final energy consuming sectors such as transport, buildings, industries are all being electrified. So look at the very last chart and you can see there's double the size of pace of the electricity demand growth. And we expect this trend to accelerate in the coming decade. So by 2035, the pace of electricity demand growth is almost the 4 times faster than the pace of total energy demand growth. And over the past decade, what is interesting is about in the advanced economies, the electricity demand was stalling, not growing that much. And it is mainly emerging economies that drove the demand growth for electricity. But interestingly, in the coming years, we expect advanced economy to resume the demand growth for electricity as some new segment of demand, such as EVs, AI, data centers, and digital devices coming into play. So electricity is becoming the major topic for the energy transition discussions. And to underpin all this, the electricity demand growth, the robust, the reliable input for critical minerals is becoming very central topics to ensure some reliable supply of transitions. And in the critical minerals market, the main story is about the falling prices across the board. After sharp increases in 2021 and 2022, by and large, the prices for these minerals now are back at the level we have seen in the pre-pandemic. And it is interesting to think about the reasons for these recent price declines. In our view, it's not because demand faltered. Because if you look at the past annual average demand growth for lithium, nickel, cobalt, graphite, lithium demand grows almost 25% per year over the past 4 years. Likewise, nickel, cobalt, graphite, all demand grew by some 6 to 8% per year, which is quite robust number. But supply growth has been even stronger with some output growth from China, Indonesia, Africa, and that underpins some big price decline we are seeing right now. But going forward, because of the robust pace of clean tech deployment, we think still demand growth for critical minerals will remain intact. So in our announced project scenario that reflects all countries' national climate pledges, this demand for critical minerals almost triples by the 2040. And in all of the IEA scenarios, and demand for these critical minerals continue to grow. And the lithium demand is really standing out some 8-fold growth, but also demand for nickel, cobalt, graphite, all growing by some 2 to 4 times growth over the next 2 decades. So this is really big segment of demand in total. And as you can see from the chart, the green part is the portion driven by the clean energy segment. So you can see some clearly big, this clean tech segment being a big segment of total demand of this mineral market. So implication of this picture is about now energy sector stakeholders need to understand what is happening in the minerals and metal market, and likewise, the metal industry need to understand what is happening in the energy transition space. Then, yes, demand is growing, but next natural question is what about supply? So we look at these supply issues through 3 major angles. The first, volume perspectives, whether we can meet this level of demand through some undercut supplies. And second angle is about diversification, whether we can source these minerals from diversified sources. And the third angle is about sustainable, responsible supplies, whether these volumes can come from clean, responsible sources. So we look at these 3 angles by looking at the data and whether industry is making progress on these 3 dimensions. One first, about the volume questions. And this is the total demand split into 2 portions. The upper part, the light yellow, is what we call the portion we estimate can be met by secondary supply through recycling. And the dark, the yellow area is what we call primary supply requirement, which need to be met by new mines, new smelters, and new refineries. And we built some 2 supply scenarios based on detailed review of the announced project to compare where this expected demand, expected supply compare, and how that would evolve. And the result is quite mixed, depending on the minerals you're talking about. In the case of copper and lithium, we estimate expected supply from announced project fall short of what is required in the APS scenario in 2035. Still, there's a lot more way to go to develop new supplies to meet the level of demand. In the case of nickel and cobalt, things look slightly better, but still there are some more ways to go to meet the level of demand expected in this scenario. And graphite and rare earth element may not face big volume risks, but these 2 materials are something that have a very high level of concentrations, which is another worrying sign. So, and when you show the gap between demand and supply, the result is not set in stone. This can be closed, gap can be closed by developing some additional project or promoting further recycling and other measures. So this analysis is to the stock take today's investment and policy trend and encourage some further policy and investment to close these gaps. But at least we are making some progress about increasing supplies. But the same cannot be said for diversifications. We all know the mining and processing of these minerals is highly concentrated in few number of countries. For example, China controls over some 60-70% of refining of these minerals, and likewise Indonesia is very decisive player in the nickel refining. But the question is, what about the future? So we know today's supply is concentrated, but what we saw is almost 75% of today's announced projects are being developed in today's leading producers. That means this level of concentration is likely to stay in the coming decade. And why this is an issue? Because if supply is highly concentrated in few number of countries. If there are some major natural disasters or technical failures or other trade restrictions happens in the major producers, and that can have an impact on global market, global prices, and global supplies, and reflect on consumers. This is one of the reasons we pay very much attention to this issue of the diversification and encourage some more strengthened the policy actions to incentivize the process of diversification. And finally, we need more materials to, especially from diversified regions, to serve demand growth. But these materials should come from clean and responsible sources, should not come at the expense of environmental and social damages. So to underpin that, what we are doing is to stock take today's industry's progress based on the objective data. Based on some 25 big mining companies' performance, we try to quantify and track the performance of ESG performance, where industry is making progress and where progress is lacking. And the result is quite mixed. In some areas, such as the social investment and gender balance and worker safety and renewable energy use, we are seeing some progress being made by the industries. Although there are some long ways to go to further step up the performance, but there has been some progress. But the same cannot be said for environmental indicators such as greenhouse gas emissions, waste, and water use. So if you look at the intensity of these water use, emissions, and waste generations, and it hasn't seen any improvement in recent years. This is not to say the industry is not making progress. Industry is putting some effort, but still, you need to put some further effort to improve and turn this trend to ensure some clean and responsible supplies. And to underpin all this, to increase the supply from diversified sources, also from clean and responsible sources, you need to investment. And what we are seeing is today's low price environment impacting the whole investment landscape. After some years of decent investment growth, in 2024, we saw the pace of investment growth is stalling. The mining majors still holding up and faring better, but junior miners and also lithium specialists are heavily affected by the price downturn. And likewise, exploration spending in the middle is also stalling after some years of growth. So copper and uranium is the two materials that still getting some exploration spending, but other materials saw some notable declines. And likewise, on the very right side, the startup activities and venture capital investment is also stagnating, one of the worrying signs we are seeing in today's market. And to address these challenges of our critical minerals, we need more investment, but also we think there are some ample potential for demand-side actions to play a role, such as recycling and technology innovation and behavioral changes. So I will touch upon these three angles briefly in the following slide. In terms of recycling, if you look at the historical performance, and things don't look that promising because if you look at the share of the recycling on total demand and total supply, the number has not been improving. But we see some regions and slight optimism for the future because we are seeing some looming influx of the spent batteries, spent electric cars, spent solar panels coming to the market after 2030. And how we can capture this potential to collect these spent materials adequately and then recycle them is making some key difference in ensuring some reliable supply of critical minerals. For example, this copper and batteries, solar panels from the graph, you are seeing the exponential growth after 2030. So the capturing and utilizing this potential is really important. And if successful, we think the proper recycling can reduce the mining need by some 25 to 40%, depending on the minerals. Around 40% for copper, 20 to 25% lithium and nickel, and another 40% for cobalt. So recycling can really bring some greater security, environmental, and also financial benefit in our view. And another thing I want to highlight is about the consumer's role. In the traditional car market, what we saw is people tend to prefer larger vehicles, SUVs and bigger vehicles, so the size of the average vehicles just kept increasing. And what we are seeing is that this trend we saw in the conventional car, petroleum car space is now being replicated in the EV space. And if you look at the average size of the batteries, average size of cars, and this size, the consumers are choosing the bigger vehicles and larger batteries. And that also adds some additional pressure for the material demand. So how we can nudge consumers choose the optimal size of cars and batteries can also have some sizable impact in reducing the material demand and also alleviating the pressure on the supply side. And finally, we think also there are some big potential for technology innovation. Technology can play a very big role in reducing the supply strains. For example, on the demand side, some new battery technologies, new battery chemistries can reduce the material demand quite a lot. And also, in the solar panels, we have seen the use of silicons and other precious metals reduce quite sharply in the past decade. And that reduced the market tightening of these minerals. And also similarly, we are also seeing some big potential for the supply side, the technology innovation for mining, refining, and recycling. For example, here, the direct lithium extraction technologies can unlock a lot of sizable new supplies at a low cost, and also can help reduce environmental and social impact from these mining and refining operations. And also, some novel graphite and rare earth element separation technologies, and also recycling technologies to recover metals from lower grade resources is also very crucial. So unlocking this potential of technologies through some dedicated policy effort and also collaboration is very much crucial to address these grand challenges of critical minerals. And this was some key findings from our global critical mineral outlook report. And we will release new report in 1 month in the late May on the IAEA website. So I just wanted to ask you to stay tuned for the upcoming report. We will take a look at the whole updated projection about demand, supply, investment. Also, we will take some deep dive about how we can what are some emerging issues about the battery technology supply chains, and also some mechanisms to incentivize the process of diversification. I will stop here and thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we will now be gathering for the central panel, which will focus on batteries. So with me today are Carlo Charles, founder and CEO of Flint, a startup developing a paper battery. Sophie Rivoirard, the co-founder and CTO of MagREEsource, a company that recycles rare earth magnets. And finally, Pierre Bagnon, the executive vice president at Capgemini and the lead for Gigafactory and battery practice. My name is Emily Steinmark, and I'm a science correspondent at The Economist. So we are going to be talking first about how we might rethink batteries. And we have a lot to get through, so try and keep answers short and snappy. Carlo, Flint is pioneering paper-based batteries. And Sophie, MagREEsource is pushing what can be achieved with scrap from electric vehicles and wind turbines. I want to hear about how both your technologies can shift the industry away from new mineral mining. Sophie, let's start with you.
So yeah, when we talk about battery, we also talk about motors, because behind each batteries we have a motors to be functional. So magnets are essential for motors, for sensors and actuators, and for, of course, our new technologies and for the energy transition toward electricity. So our model at MagREEsource is to produce rare earth-based magnets based from end-of-life products. So we extract those magnets from current applications, such as hard disk drive, motors from e-scooters, from washing machines, from wind turbines, from electric vehicles, and we reprocess them into new magnets to provide, well, the energy transition and the European OEM with those magnets. So this is really a circular economy-based model where we don't extract any natural resources, but only use secondary, so-called secondary resources.
Excellent. Carlo, do you want to introduce Flint and how you're shifting the industry?
Sure. Hi, everyone. We're from Singapore. We're building paper batteries, and what we're trying to do is we're trying to build a new chemistry that has no lithium, nickel, and cobalt in our batteries. So what we use is cellulose that you find in paper as an essential component of our battery, which means we make our own anode, our own cathode, and our own electrolyte materials, synthesized down to the atomic level, and then we avoid critical and toxic and scarce materials from our entire chemistry because we want to decentralize from the entire supply chain of these materials that we will be talking about later. And the key benefits we get out of our batteries are, number one, cost. Our input materials are cheaper than existing lithium chemistries. And by that, when we move to production, we are $50 per kilowatt hour, whereas lithium ranges from $100 to $130 per kilowatt hour. And when we move to the safety, our chemistry is actually water-based. We don't use any acids or any high concentrate electrolytes. And that's because we want our chemistry to be leak-proof in large-scale applications and also fire-resistant. And if anyone is interested, you can come over to our booth. You can see videos of it being exposed to fire. And lastly is sustainability, where our carbon footprint is much lower compared to lithium chemistries because of our supply chain, and number two, our end of life, where the batteries are actually compostable and they can go back to nature. They can degrade after 6 weeks when you expose them to like sunlight, rainwater, away from the casing. So what we're doing now is we're moving towards production, mass production, and we're making these batteries in large scale so that we can go towards bigger applications like consumer electronics, medical devices, IoT sensors, and that you mentioned also. And we'll be stepping forward with more and much bigger applications moving on, yeah.
Great. So we've got magnet recycling and we've got a new kind of battery relying on different chemistry. Pierre, how does this fit with what you're seeing at Capgemini in terms of the sort of broader shifts in the battery industry?
Yeah, thank you, Emily. And hello, Sophie. Hello, Carlo. If we first take a step back, the battery industry is going through a revolution. It's quite remarkable, actually, the investment, the acceleration that this industry is going through. To cite some figures, it's over 100 billion being invested. It's a complete new value chain that is being built. Coming from Asia, firstly, and here we have to acknowledge, that's something we and the Western world, are learning from China, Korea, partially Japan, and we're catching up. This industry is absolutely key if you want to decarbonize mobility, have energy storage, to state the obvious, but there are a lot of new industrial applications also that will be created. And in that race, it comes with some challenges. Industrial ramp-up, currently, that's what we hear a lot actually in Europe, in the US, and that's for the current chemistry that we have to deal with, that are primarily based on NMC, LFP, so based out of lithium with nickel, manganese, cobalt, iron phosphate, and quite obviously, and we've seen the presentation just before from Tae-Yoon, it raised some question on the critical materials, but this will evolve. And if we look at the learning curve of new chemistry that took place, and very happy, to see a innovation company like you do, Carlo, on the truly the next generation of batteries. It's a revolution that will bring. Obviously, it will take time. We still have to master this first generation, and this first generation of batteries will raise indeed some question on the material. Recycling will be key. I cannot enforce that more than Tae-Yoon did, because that's the only way also that we can improve the cost power and be less dependent of those critical materials. And so again, that's a complete new value chain. That's a complete new ecosystem, and therefore we need a lot of innovation like you do, even though we have to concentrate first on one of the critical points like industrial ramp-up, making sure that we create this new value chain or ecosystem, but there's still a lot of innovation that needs to be pursued to bring that industry at scale.
So let's touch on why all of this innovation is needed, right? So underlying all of this is a sort of an attempt to avoid a new rush for scarce resources, right? We're trying to move away from fossil fuels that will not last forever and that are polluting the planet towards an electric transition. So as companies try to scale clean technologies, what underlying principles, just broadly, sort of outside of innovation or whatever, should they be guided by in order to avoid triggering just another rush on natural resources? That's for all of you. Anyone who wants to jump in.
Yeah, of course, if we consider recycling, of course, we can avoid extraction of natural resources, but recycling is not the solution, is part of the solution of the problem. If we want to make the energy transition, there will be new extraction needed, of course, all around the world, but recycling can be part of the solution. Another thing to be noted is that recycling, especially for magnets, is at the very beginning. So we have to build the whole value chain, the whole collection chain, the whole dismantling chain before being able to treat those materials. And this will be done here in Europe. This will be done by workers and create jobs here in our countries. So that's also a very, let's say, positive effect, side effect, to build this whole value chain which didn't exist before.
Okay, we are just rushing through all of these, so let's move on to talk about how we have the innovation, we have the principles, all of that's great, but to get it off the ground really, in the short term it's going to need the new inventions will need a smooth path into existing systems, but they also need, as we heard before, to be resilient long term. Carlo, how do you balance the radical innovation that you will need for something like inventing a paper battery with compatibility for the larger system?
Yep. One of the key issues that we have been facing now is the friction towards a new battery technology. Well, you can imagine it's a very well-oiled machine, the entire system, where everyone is so used with the lithium batteries and also the entire supply chain with it. But if we're introducing something new, there's a big friction towards trying an entire system that attracts to it. Because if you think about it, let's think about this microphone, right? If you want this microphone to have a new kind of battery inside, you would have to redesign the entire microphone just to hold a new kind of battery. Well, that's something we took into account from the early days as we were building this product since 2019, is we wanted to follow the same manufacturing process as existing technologies today. That follows like the same calendaring process, slitting process, coating process of lithium batteries. And by following that, we're able to make batteries today in the same form factors as existing lithium batteries. Like think about coin cells or cylindrical cells or even the pouch cells. So by conforming ourselves to those standards, we are able to make batteries that can fit into existing products today. So if you want your phone to have a paper battery in the future, we're making the switching costs so minimal so that all you have to do as a manufacturer is just take out your lithium battery and put in our paper batteries inside. And by doing that, it enables the switch to be much easier, lesser friction, and at the same time, bigger impact and easier market education from our side.
Fascinating. So, Pierre, when we talk about that long-term resilience, right? So there's the sort of short-term smooth, how do we put it into the system, but long-term resilience. How can different players make batteries more sustainable, more traceable, perhaps in terms of digital innovation or new chemistries?
I will answer the long-term part, but short-term and mid-term, to bounce back on what Carlo mentioned, there are few elements that now battery designer, battery makers, the Gigafactory needs to integrate. design for recycling, design for circularity, has not yet completely fully embraced. And there are good reasons for that. They had to concentrate so much on innovations to bring the cell, the pack at the energy density that we know now that enables all the the cycle, the lifespan. That's quite important. We should not undermine this. Now, indeed, they need to inject, design for recycling principle, how we can simply dismantle batteries. It's a nightmare to dismantle a battery today. We're losing a lot. So there are simple, engineering things that needs to be integrated. Traceability, and that's quite short term. In Europe, we can be lucky that regulation will be enforced in 2027 through the battery passport. That's a starting point. That will not solve the problem, though. That's one key element in order to ensure that we know, where this cobalt, lithium will come from, the origin, can trace it. We'll understand, the state of health of the battery as they are running, and be able so that will facilitate all the recycling. And I cannot agree more with you, though, standardization, it's a nightmare if you look at all the formats, the chemistries. They will continue to have evolution, and we need to have those evolution in order to fuel this innovation. But yes, we need to be able to standardize more at points. Otherwise, it will be very hard to recycle, to swap, to integrate all the new business model that. Now, and Sophie, sorry for the long answer, but on a more long-term view, indeed, and all of our clients are massively investing into that. Digital is playing quite a key role in order to accelerate the search for all those new chemistries. We mentioned it, so NMC, LFP are the current major chemistry. Sodium ion will come in, solid state. Hopefully, we will see more of the paper-based or cellulose-based in our short-term future. We need to be able to accelerate this scientific research, and AI, generative AI, for example, here is a key lever. The ability also to be able to concretely simulate the process design as we do a new product is quite key, because being able to scale up or industrialize scale those chemistry is a very challenge. And here digital will help. Traceability, of course. And the last example I will take is we're still living upon a generation, first generation of massive battery. If I take the example of EV, the capability to monitor what we call the battery management system that is taking place in each vehicle. These also will have to innovate and should embrace some more AI in order to be much more accurate, not only in the pack that you have to recycle, but the cell itself. And how can we longer term introduce self-healing cells? That's the type of innovation we'll have to deal with.
Sophie, there's another geopolitical aspect to this. When I've spoken to you in the past, you've sort of highlighted this fact that you're at the helm of a European company. Why should battery recycling be a European priority, do you think? And how can that focus be ensured from a regulatory perspective?
Well, as far as magnets are concerned, we have many stacks. And of course, the first one is to be able to recover those materials from end-of-life products. So from a regulation point of view, we need to make sure that there will be some help from states, from the European Commission to avoid any leak of waste outside Europe, meaning that we need the waste and end-of-life products to be kept within our borders in order for us to recycle them. So this is the major stack. We are facing a lot of exportation of those waste to South countries, or which of course is not sustainable, but which is also a great lack of for us. Of course, those industries also need support, including financial support, because they are highly capitalistic. Those industries are linked to chemistry, metallurgy, and everything needs to be rebuilt. And those industries are also highly energy intensive. So all those things have to be taken into account in order for Europe to be sovereign for this energy transition and for all those materials as well.
So one thing that we haven't discussed a lot yet, but is a very live debate in the whole climate space is justice. We know that the burden is not shared equally across the world. Carlo, you are Singaporean, like you said, but you grew up in the Philippines. How did that impact the way that you approach battery technology today?
Yeah, I was born and raised in the Philippines, and if you know Philippines, it's actually very prone to climate change. There's like almost 100 floods, landslides, typhoons, storms every single month. So being raised in that kind of environment really affected how I saw the world. There were weeks where we didn't have water to drink, or weeks where we don't have electricity to like charge phones or do anything we want. And sometimes schools will be just canceled like that, like because of strong rain. Or my neighbor's house will just fly away one night because of strong winds. So seeing this, it really affected like something wrong is going with the planet. So as a 12-year-old kid, what did I want to do? I wanted to see what I do to help that, right? So I fell in love with tinkering and like fixing and building solutions. And that's when I started working on many, many different kinds of projects, that deep tech projects, climate projects, which got funded by Google, Nat Geo, US Air Force, US Embassy. And that also allowed me to learn a lot about the batteries, different kinds of batteries, lead acids, lithium polymer, lithium ion, supercapacitors. And it led me to understand the fundamentals of how these batteries work. And as a tinkerer, as an engineer, I naturally just wanted to jump to the next problem I want to solve, which is batteries. And that's how I fell into the entire problem of batteries, and building this company started from it, yeah. And beyond that, with Singapore also, Singapore is a very small country. We don't have much natural resources. So decentralizing how batteries can be made is going to be very important in the future. Understanding that batteries is the future. So being dependent on countries like China and the US is going to be very critical for everyone moving forward. So by decentralizing how we make batteries, we can redefine how batteries can be used and how we think about batteries.
So I want to broaden it all out to all of you. So in a minute, we're going to be hearing from Helena Gualinga about the situation facing indigenous communities in Latin America with mineral mining. How do you think different stakeholders can make sure that justice becomes an integral part of the battery industry going forwards, and the different people who are directly impacted by this are heard? Anyone to jump in?
I can start. Justice is going to be a critical element, I think probably one of the next question. In order to really come to that, if we're honest with ourselves, the topic that Sophie brought in, about sovereignty first, might be critical. Otherwise, there will be no justice. The market will be simply detected by the Chinese. So sorry to say the honest truth, but this is what's going to happen if we first don't get sovereign, bringing our own capability to produce, to design, to recycle. And yes, definitely, there is a question when this industry will truly come at scale, how do we make sure we tackle the deep concerns on the social aspect? Take the example of cobalt. I mean, a large German OEM was exposed, a few months back about his sourcing choice of cobalt, in Congo. This raised question, about labor, ethical labor, and I think we're making progress on that. I think the industry has to be conscious of the chance having batteries at scale we have, but the risk also that it triggers. So yes, justice is definitely an important point, but again, we will be able to bring in it and to have a voice about it, if and only if we are part of that industry.
Are there any minerals that are simply too tainted by the situation around their extraction for you to think that they, form any part of the future of battery technologies? Carlo?
Well, we have to really engage with the communities that are deeply involved with the mineral extractions right now. If you think about like one example, cobalt right now, 80% of almost 80% of the entire world's cobalt comes from Congo. And if you simply just Google in your phones like cobalt mining in Congo, you can see how bad the pictures are. There's like people holding it with their bare hands, no masks. But when we handle it in the lab, we wear like all kinds of protections for ourselves. So seeing children, women, and all kinds of men like trying to extract these with unrestricted mines in places like Congo with just one material for batteries is a big problem by itself, right? And the thing is, many manufacturers cannot say anything about this because that's the best option we have right now. So we really need to like rethink our entire supply chain and look at ethical sourcing moving forward. And we need to listen to like the leaders that we'll be listening to later, because we want to put justice and sustainability really in the middle of innovation, not just an afterthought moving forward.
Excellent. Sophie, do you have anything to add?
Well, from the social point of view, recycling is a very good solution. We are highly committed with what we call in France économie sociale et solidaire. So I don't know how to translate, but it's something like solidarity economy, which enable people which are far from employment or with disability, any kind of, to be employed and to contribute to the recycling process and to the value chain. So from the social point of view, this is a very good impact as well.
Excellent. Any last thoughts before we give up the stage for a fireside chat? No?
Well, if I take 30 seconds on that, I mean, it's a great opportunity. Not the critical mineral piece. I mean, that's a great challenge. But being able to build, a long-standing, sustainable industry will create jobs. Will help us basically to keep up with some level of comfort we have around mobility, energy usage. But we have to make it very consciousness, not to create another problem. So hence this. Topic on mineral and recycling is absolutely key.
Excellent. Thank you so much for all those perspectives. That's about all we have time for. So thanks again, everyone. So with me now is Helena Gualinga, a human rights and environment advocate from the Indigenous Zariaku community in Ecuador. Welcome.
Thank you, Emily.
So I'm really excited to talk to you about all of this because it's a lot. You began your advocacy at just 13 years old, initially focusing on oil. Can you walk us through how that evolved into your current work on mining and what that shift has looked like in your own community?
Yeah. Sorry for my voice, by the way, but initially our main threat in the Amazon was oil extraction. And throughout the years, we've seen an increase of mining concessions taking place, both in the Amazon region and the Andes, in the mountains and the highlands. And from, understanding how oil issues were deeply related to climate change, and then understanding that there's this push for a green transition, we increasingly started to see how these were kind of pushed back onto our territories. And so we can kind of see this shift going from first exploiting oil to now exploiting minerals. And I think it's also really important to mention that there's a lot of what I call legalized mining, because I think the Amazon should be considered a no-go zone for extractive activity. And then there's illegal mining, which is often related to organized crime and criminal groups, and it's really hard to trace where it's going and where the money is coming from, and really, really difficult to tackle. But I always do say that I do think it is possible to tackle it if there's political will. However, we do lack a lot of political will when it comes to that.
So you mentioned they're both legalized and illegal mining, and that poses threats to indigenous communities. Could you help us understand just the different kinds of human risk? We'll get into the environmental risk, but the human risks involved and how they affect people on the ground.
Well, I think first of all, just acknowledging that the mining sector is one of the, biggest drivers of environmental conflict across the world, and especially in Latin America. If you look into numbers that are, of indigenous leaders or environmental defenders that have been murdered in environmental conflicts related to mining, you will see that that number is very, very high. And I work with women that are protecting their territories from mining companies, and they get threats on a daily basis. And it's threats, it's intimidation, they also use the judicial system and denounce them for all sorts of things. There's an increasing pressure on all land defenders that are working towards or working against mining, because they come with huge amounts of resources, and they're small communities standing up against these large companies. And I said it already, but the threats and the intimidation coming from these mining companies is devastating. And I've had friends who have had their lives threatened directly by people that work at companies, and it's public information. It's it's not that it's being hidden anywhere either. For sure, there's a bunch of those cases too, but some of it's been people have gone to the police and said this has happened, and yet nothing is done. And a lot of these companies, yes, some are companies from our own countries, but some are also Canadian or Australian or Chinese, and it's all it's kind of all I guess allowed to happen from these countries.
So there's both a kind of a threat from outside companies, but also perhaps the sort of systems in place that are meant to protect people locally that is failing them. You also spend a lot of your time advocating for the environment. Are there any experiences in your own life that have put that environmental impact of mining and extraction into sharp focus for you?
Yeah. Well, first of all, in Ecuador and in Latin America, there's these huge mega mines that they use these kind of waste pools. So there's a bunch of chemicals and toxics in these big pools, and they leak, and no one really does anything about it. And so there's a huge environmental impact. And people talk about sustainable mining and so forth. It's really hard to say that any of this is sustainable, as they are literally breaking the earth open and then spilling all these chemicals into waterways and into nature. That is a legalized mining. They have all the licenses, and they're allowed to operate and so forth. And then there's this kind of gray zone. It's some sort of gray zone mining, which is legal companies who operate illegally. So they are allowed to mine for certain minerals in certain areas, but they mine for other minerals. Or they even expand the areas where they're allowed to mine. And then we have illegal mining, which a lot of times when it comes to, for example, gold mining, they use mercury. and mercury is being used directly and being spilled into people's waters. And just a little up north from where I come from, it's been heavily in the past few years, like it's been heavily affected by a new wave of illegal mining. That's it's really complex of how it's come about, but organized crime is involved and a bunch of other factors. And every time I go back, there's just kilometers and kilometers of forest that's just gone. And this is an area that used to be so pristine. The riverbeds were, beautiful. I used to bathe in these rivers. I cannot touch that water now because it stinks. And if I do, I will get stuff on my body, and because the mercury is so heavy. And again, and I repeat this, and I do this all the time in Ecuador, if people were to actually regulate, also I want to just paint a picture of what this looks like. These is just they just open up land. You can see this from a satellite. It's not something that can be hidden. When politicians say that oh, we can't do anything about it because it's so hard to trace or anything, you can see this from space. It's not that hard. It's kind of frustrating to try to because the only people that can intervene in these cases are state actors or the government, because you don't really know what we're dealing with, right? And yeah, my friend lives in one of these communities, and it's just heartbreaking to see what's happening, and it's heartbreaking. One of my best friends, she always says one of the saddest moments was when where the island where my grandparents or her grandparents were buried was just devastated. It was just all gone in a matter of days. And those are just stories that we keep hearing, and it's just the reality of things. And much of this is gold.
So people are basically seeing the forest being cut down around them, huge expanses that are so large that you can see them from space, and both their bathing and their drinking water being contaminated. And so is all of this mining, paint this picture for us. Is the mining happening, directly in the Amazon? Is it in the mountains? And how is that connected? Is it the whole, does it have to be quite localized to affect people that live there, or is it connected in that way?
That's actually a great question, because so what the mining that happens, for example, in the highlands, the entire Amazon rainforest is born in the highlands. The entire ecosystem is so interconnected to the mountains and the waters that are born from the mountains. If mining takes place in the highlands, the Amazon rivers will dry out, because that's another environmental impact, which is that rivers actually dry up as a result. And all this, everything that I said, mercury and all these other things, they obviously come down with the water. And yes, the mining that is taking place in the Amazon, it is literally in the jungle. And the illegal mining is often in the rivers and in the riverbeds, and these large mega mining projects, they just cut open the forest, and it's just ponds and holes larger than this venue, and it's pretty devastating.
And that's in your lifetime, presumably. These things go back a while with the oil. So, from your point of view, we mentioned how when you began your advocacy work when you were very young, in that time, has the push for minerals and mineral mining, in the name of the green transition, often become as devastating to indigenous communities and the environment that they call their home as oil was before mining?
I think it's first of all given people some sort of justification to promote mining as something that is sustainable and better for the climate and so forth and so forth. And the reality is that it isn't. we cannot continue to devastate places like the Amazon. The Amazon, and I say this all the time, the Amazon as an ecosystem should be a no-go zone. There should be no negotiating over, like, extractive activities should not happen in a critical ecosystem like the Amazon. And I think also, like the earlier panel, you talked about the kind of social aspect of mining, and I mean, it is literally about reinforcing laws in our countries and making sure that free, prior, and informed consent is respected, and making sure that Indigenous people's rights are respected, and that we also have a say in what happens to our territories. Yet these companies continue constantly to undermine our own participation in what happens in our homelands, in our territories. And yes, I think the green transition has been used to, continue to promote like an extractive agenda and a model that is still based on extracting from nature. We've just switched what we're extracting now. We started with oil, and now we're doing minerals. And somehow it's celebrated, and somehow people applaud people for that, instead of actually sitting down and having the really tough conversation about where is this all going to come from, because it's all going to come from, if you look at the maps of where future mining concessions are in Latin America, in Bolivia, in Argentina, it's all on Indigenous people's lands. Why? Because Indigenous peoples are the only ones that have maintained land intact from exploitation. There's a reason why those minerals are still there. And so, in short, yes, the green transition is pushing for an incredibly unjust, burden onto Indigenous peoples.
Do you think that has made it harder for you to be heard? Because the sort of the narrative on oil now is many people are on side with let's stop taking oil out of the ground, right? Like obviously there are some that disagree, but I think broadly people come around to that idea. Do you think the fact that minerals and mining is connected to the green transition, do you think that has made it more difficult for your concerns to be taken seriously?
Yes, in a way, yes, because oil is like oil. We all agree that oil is bad, but I think there's just there's a desire to maintain the narrative of that mining is still good and that we can find like justification for it, and so there's all these the entire mining industry, in my opinion, is it's a PR machine. Like, they've been able to achieve and make people believe that there is such a thing as sustainable mining. There isn't. Like, there truly is no such thing as sustainable mining. And then we can connect it to all, what we were talking about earlier, like how it, like the human cost of it and the environmental cost of it, and like how it's like it's threatening people and all these things. But as an activity, it's not aligned with planetary health, and I cannot see how they just continue to push this discourse of that this is sustainable and we're doing this for a better world, or so forth, so forth.
So if we look forward a bit, what would true consent and justice look like for Indigenous communities in terms of mining, in terms of any extractive operation? Is it even possible to have mining and have true consent and justice?
Well, I think, again, free, prior, and informed consent, one of the most important tools when it comes to any type of development of projects or whatever on Indigenous territories. And I think it's up to each Indigenous, each autonomous Indigenous community or peoples to decide on that. But we should have the right to decide, and we should have the right to speak against it without the fear of being persecuted, or the fear of receiving threats, or losing our lives, or like all these things. I think it's an extremely complicated issue and complex. But we can only have that conversation, and we can only have that conversation once we all agree that we need to enter that conversation equally. Like, we cannot enter that conversation when one person is fearing to lose their life and the other is just like thinking about like how much, can I make a few dollars more here and there. And I think that's what the real conversation is about. Like, can we enter this conversation on equal terms? Because right now we're not, and our rights are constantly, are constantly being undermined, and that's one of our main issues.
I guess the reason I ask is you've laid out this history that communities like yours have with the mining companies that exist today. Would you trust them to enter into a process like this? Even, if they said we're going to do everything that you ask us to do, would you trust them?
Well, so for example, my community, we have basically what we understand as free, prior, and informed consent in my community is that we don't even want to dialogue with you. Like, we don't want to talk to oil companies, and we don't want to talk to mining companies. And if you try to talk to us, you're already overstepping our boundary. That is how we interpret it, and that should be respected. We are absolutely not interested in engaging in that conversation. I think that, just kind of, understanding free, prior, and informed consent, there's so many dirty tactics that are used in this industry, which is manipulation and bribing people, and there's so much underlying corruption that takes place for these projects to actually go through. Can we even talk? We can't talk about transparency, and we cannot talk about free consent. That is not free consent. And so there's a structural problem of how they operate and how it's been normalized, and how there is such a lack of regulating these kinds of activities. And that means both in the host country, like the Latin American countries like Ecuador that are mining destinations, but also countries like Canada and Australia that incentivize these countries to go out there and then have no due diligence whatsoever in what they're actually doing. And they trust, the director of human rights at the mining company to tell them that everyone's fine and everyone's happy, and they believe them and they think everything's fine. And so largely a responsibility lays on, or is in, in this part of the world where these projects are being pushed from onto our territories.
So we've got very little time left, but I just want to ask this one last question, which is, you mentioned, the regulation and so on. What are some concrete steps that you think governments can take, not just in the host countries, but also in the countries from where the companies are coming from, to improve the situation? What's the first thing that needs to happen?
I think explicitly mention, explicitly elaborate on what free, prior, and informed consent means, and make sure that if there are signs of resistance, of opposition, then stop it. And that's it. And let's see what's actually going on. Because I think there's a huge, information gap, because what happens on the ground is not necessarily communicated to where the people that are regulating it. And so how do we close that information gap? Maybe by learning and understanding more. And I know we don't have a lot more time, and there's a lot of very technical things that can be done. And I think they know exactly what can be done. They just refuse to do it.
We're out of time, but it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for joining me on the stage today. Thank you, everyone.